I'm Roger Misso, and this is How to Lose an Election. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to welcome you to this inaugural episode of How to Lose an Election. And I have with me our first guest, an honored guest, a good friend, Qasim Rashid, who ran for Congress in Virginia's 1st Congressional District in 2020. He was a candidate for state office in Virginia before that. He's a scholar, an activist, one of the best human beings, I think, on the planet. So Qasim, I'm glad you're here. And the first question I want to start everybody off with every episode is, tell me who you were before you were a candidate, sort of in your own words.
Sure. Well, Roger, thanks for not just inviting me and letting me have the privilege of being your first guest, but for launching this podcast. I think this is going to be really critical for new candidates, for young people, for people of all ages who are thinking about running for office to really get a clear picture and hopefully make them more prepared. So thanks for doing this. This is really awesome. As far as who I was before running for office, I hope it's the same person I am after running for office. I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm, happily married to my wonderful wife, Aisha. We have 3 amazing kids. I'm a marathoner. I like reading. I love sports. And one of the promises I made to myself before running for office was that when I run, I'm not going to make these empty promises of here's what I'll do if you elect me. What I wanted to be able to do was that, look at my record, look at what I've been doing this last decade plus. And if I'm so honored to have this seat, that's the work I'm going to continue to do on a congressional level or on a state level. And so I think who I am is I try to be somebody who is focused on service to humanity, and that's the principle that drove me to run in the first place. And I hope that the folks who know me from before I ran can attest that I'm still the same dorky dad joke loving guy before as after.
Yeah, we share an affinity for dad jokes for sure. It was a great honor to watch you go through the process of running for office, because you were one of those unique few, I feel like, at least from the outside, who stayed true to himself throughout the process, who didn't mortgage yourself off for particular political positions or for support from particular groups. So I think that's rare. I think we need to say thank you to the people who do it. So thank you. But it leads me into my next question for you, which is, why run for office? Why did you make the decision to run, and why did you make the decision to run when you did?
There's something in all of us, I think, where we look at the world and we want to do whatever we can to make it a better place. I mentioned service to humanity earlier, and my parents, my siblings and our parents ingrained in us this element of service to humanity. If you're not doing that, you're wasting your life. That was literally, indoctrinated into us at an early age. And so, about 15 years ago, when I started applying for law school, it was really with this principle of wanting to become a human rights lawyer. I actually had no intention or ambition of running for office at that time. And what's great about being in human rights law is you really have a privilege of serving people who are otherwise denied due process, denied justice, whether it's someone who's a survivor of domestic sexual violence, an asylum seeker, someone starting to start their small business and they just need to kind of get going. It's a real privilege to be an advocate in those situations. The frustration is when you realize that despite your advocacy, there are just fundamentally broken systems denying people equal justice under the law, whether it's lack of living wage, lack of healthcare, lack of voting rights because they were incarcerated. And that's when you realize that we need to change the policy. And so having worked in the trenches for over a decade in human rights law, I felt that now I had really demonstrated and exemplified that element of service. And it was time to take it to the next level of building out better policy. Because let me tell you, there's something extraordinarily rewarding, but also frustrating about knowing that this person, even though I'm going to be able to get them where they need to go, there's 1,000 more being harmed by a broken system through no fault of their own. And there are people in Washington that could change it with the stroke of a pen, literally. But because they're funded not to, they won't. And so for me, running really was about how do we transform this advocacy into policy to make sure every person has that promise of equal justice that our Constitution guarantees.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like a lot of people want to know what it's like to run for office. They've seen The West Wing, they've seen Veep, they've seen House of Cards, but they want to know what it's really like. Maybe I'm wondering if you can tell me what maybe the best moment for you was on the campaign trail, and then on the flip side of that, what was the worst moment for you during your campaign?
Sure. Well, a lot of best moments. Everything from, look, I'm a person of color. I'm a faith minority. I'm an immigrant. And so anytime I got an email from somebody saying, I never thought someone like me would be running for office or be the nominee or have a chance to be in Congress, that was exciting, because I think that's really what makes us a more perfect union, that we all should have a seat at the table. Yeah. And so, getting an email from like an adorable 10-year-old girl saying that, somebody who has the same last name as me running is an exciting thing, right? It's a powerful thing. Or an immigrant, whether they're an immigrant from Pakistan like me, or from anywhere in Asia or Africa or South America. I mean, just an immigrant saying, and we even got a couple on camera, and this surprised me and got me emotional, saying that just to see an immigrant running, somebody who didn't speak a word of English when I first came here, those were the heartwarming moments, right? And then you had moments where somebody said, I'm a lifelong Republican. I voted for Trump in 2016, and I've been watching the way you respond, and I realized that you're going to have my vote. That's really exciting too, because you're trying to build those bridges and really focus, on what you said earlier, that you stay true to who you are and you attract people with your sincerity. Worst moments, I think, was watching the impact the death threats and the nasty vitriol from my opponent had on my family. My opponent, a Republican, corporate Republican, helped ignite the insurrection last month. Well-funded by corporations. We actually had more individual donors to our campaign in 2020 alone than he's had in his 14 years in Congress combined. Because he takes these big fat checks from corporations. And what's ironic is, I'm a big fan of dialogue. And so I actually reached out to him and his campaign manager before the campaign even launched and said, look, I want to debate ideas. I just want to make sure you're not going to attack me for my faith. I've gotten death threats in the past. And his campaign manager said, don't worry, Congressman Whitman is a stand-up guy who would never do such a thing. And then, I'm sitting at Jiffy Lube getting an oil change, and my wife is with me in a few, moments of peace that we had during the campaign. And on the television at Jiffy Lube, this commercial comes on about how I'm an extremist and I support Islamic terrorism and just all sorts of reckless things. And then you get the nasty emails and the threats. And then he doubles down. And so, I've become calloused to the hate because I can handle it. I know what to expect. I'm going in eyes wide open. But to see that impact on my wife and having to censor that for my children, who are 12, 7, and 5, that's a painful thing. That's a really painful and hurtful thing. And anyone who's going into politics should be ready for that, unfortunately. But, I think, Roger, one of the reasons why I was so grateful to have your support during the campaign is because the way you ran your PAC, or run your PAC, and the way you ran your campaign was on this principle that politics doesn't have to be nasty and vicious. We really should and can focus on our better angels and focus on the issues that actually matter. So hopefully that's where we can take this in the future. But that was kind of a long-winded answer of what was the painful part of it.
Yeah, yeah. I watched some of your response to those threats and that just viciously negative attacks against you, and had a lot of admiration for how you held your head up despite what they were doing to you. And I guess I wonder, I'm a white guy and I don't have a lot of the same experiences that you do. What you think about future Muslim candidates, immigrant candidates? Do you think that they're dissuaded when they see those kind of attacks on people like you who've built a career on doing the right thing and being honorable and having integrity in everything that you do? Do you think it dissuades them? And if you're talking to the Muslim candidate who runs after Qasim, what do you say to them? What do you tell them? How do they weather that storm to make sure that our country is represented by truly representative people?
Well, I think it certainly does have an impact, and I get these emails as well that I don't know if I want to expose myself to that kind of hateful rhetoric. That said, I'm by no means the pioneer in this space. I mean, you've got Keith Ellison, Andre Carson, yeah, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and that's just on a federal level, right? On the local and state level, you've got hundreds. Here in Virginia, we've got Sam Rasool, who's running for lieutenant governor right now. Zalala Hashmi, who ran in the Senate. But what I try to tell young Muslims especially is to reflect and remember that one, not only is this country not a theocracy, we're a secular democracy, we're a secular republic. And we explicitly forbade there being any religious tests. But if you really want to drill down and look at the history, 15 to 30% of the Africans enslaved and brought here by force were Muslim. And they worked on the plantations and built the roads and built the White House and fought in the Civil War. Muhammad Khan, he wasn't a slave. He was a Persian immigrant who fought in the Civil War in the Battle of Gettysburg, for God's sake, and retired with commission honorably after being injured. And so when I look at how this country was built, it was built in significant part on the backs of African Muslims. And so when I see Muslims today, whether they're black, white, brown, yellow, orange, purple, what have you, running for these kinds of seats, I don't see it as unique or new. I see it as a revival of people of our faith absolutely helped build this country. And it's up to us to continue to carry that legacy by upholding justice, by demanding equity for all people. That's what our faith calls us to do. And that's where I tell young Muslims who are interested in politics, remember that your focus here is service. If you're focused on service, the rest of it will fall into place. No matter what you do, there's going to be hatred and pushback. But if your focus is truly on serving humanity, then you're going to win the hearts and minds, and you'll be able to bring about that change that you want to bring about.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good anchor, brother. I like how you said that. Well, really, the reason that I started this podcast, and if folks haven't listened to our introductory episode, it just dropped at the beginning of your podcast queue for this show, talked about, candidate training programs, politics in general. We talk a lot about how to win elections, but we almost never talk about what happens after you lose. I think the unique statistic is that something on the order of 80% of candidates will lose their election every year in the United States. The overwhelming majority of us are on the losing end. And I think that we need to be upfront and honest about that and how it feels. So I want to get your perspective on what, your own loss felt like. Did you think you would lose heading into election day? And regardless, how did you mentally prepare for essentially political judgment day?
We absolutely thought we were going to win. I mean, we went into the entire campaign with that intent and with our best foot forward. And we didn't hedge bets and say, well, let's reserve this or reserve that, or let's try to, appeal to what is the popular view. We try to focus on what was the right view, whether it was Medicare for all, Green New Deal, 15-hour living wage, whatever our perspective was, we stayed firm on that and tried to win hearts and minds based on that principle. Now, losing absolutely stung. And I think anyone who says it was no big deal is probably being a little bit dishonest. But I think what I want to emphasize, though, is there's a difference between disappointment and regret. Disappointment is because you care and because you really gave it your all. And anything you give your all in, you're certainly going to be disappointed if you don't get your goal that first time, whether it's trying to get an A on a test or trying to make a sports team or trying to land a job. In this case, a very lengthy interview process of running for office. But regret is a little bit different. Regret is when you know that you didn't give it your all, or that you were dishonest with yourself or with somebody else, or if you tried to win by violating your own principles or your own rules. And so from that standpoint, we have no regrets because we ran the right race. We did it the right way. We didn't compromise our dignity. I didn't say or do anything that I'm going to be embarrassed about, when my kids are old enough to understand what's going on, right? And I take a lot of comfort in that, because at the end of the day, as disappointing as it was to lose, and as hurtful as it was to lose, I can hold my head up high, knowing that I had the integrity to run an honest and clean race. We were unassailable. That's one of the words I use with my campaign team, and we're going to be unassailable in everything we do, so that if we get scrutinized by the New York Times or by major media and it's on the front page, we can defend our position. And I had the integrity to call my opponent election night. I had to call him multiple times because he wouldn't pick up the phone. I called him election night to concede the race. And I take pride in that, because history judges people based on how they behave in these moments of difficulty. It would have been easy for me to say, forget it. Let me just not call them. Let me mail it in. Let me just, ignore it and pretend nothing happened. But no, it was the right and honorable thing to do. So for those who are running, remember, you don't have to force yourself into a position of regret. If you lose, you're going to feel disappointment because you care. But you can choose to run a race where you don't feel regret. And I'm proud to say that myself, my team don't feel any regret. And that's something that's going to allow us to not only run again in the future, whenever that time comes, but have the trust of our base, of our donors, of even people who didn't vote for us, because they saw how we would behave when things didn't go our way, and they saw us behave in an upstanding manner. And that's, I think, one of the key points of advice I'd give to folks who are considering running in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's an awesome perspective. How did you process, I guess, that disappointment or that loss? I know for me, I'm a guy who needs to, on that Myers-Briggs, quadrant thing, I'm on the borderline between introvert and extrovert. So after the campaign, I just needed to get away, right? I needed some alone time, to read a book finally, and to really work out that, the few regrets that I did have on the campaign trail, right? And to kind of work them out internally until I got to a good place. How do you process loss and disappointment personally? Are there things you do, coping mechanisms, things that work for you, don't work for you, that you want to share with folks who are running now or who are thinking of running in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no wrong way to cope, as long as you're not, being self-destructive. I look at it two ways. One is the preparation you do before the race even begins. Talking to your family, your loved ones, anyone who's going to be immediately impacted by the race, letting them know, and more importantly, getting their buy-in, so that when push comes to shove, they aren't a source of grief for you or you for them, that you're there to support one another. My wife and I knew these attacks were coming. It didn't necessarily take the edge off, but it helped us prepare. And we knew it would be a financial burden, right? A lot of folks, don't realize that when you run for office, you're typically not earning an income unless you're independently wealthy, which a lot of folks are not. And so being able to anticipate those stresses helps you really remember why you're doing it in the first place. And then that's the second part of it, that at the end of the day, you have to remember that you can only be accountable to what was within your control. And when you've given it your all and you remember why you're doing it. So for me, it was, as I mentioned, that this is about taking my advocacy as a human rights lawyer and turning it into better policy, to combat poverty, to combat violence against women, to combat hunger, these kinds of preventable atrocities. And for me, running for office wasn't the be all end all on how to do those things. It was going to be another way for me to advance that work. But just because I'm not in Congress right now, it doesn't mean I can't continue to fight to end hunger and poverty and abuse of women and abuse of children, things that I've dedicated my life to doing already. And so for me, the coping mechanism was certainly, it took a few days to let my body kind of heal, because you're going 20 hours a day for weeks on end. So I think I slept like 2 days straight, just to let my body kind of recover. And it's not just the physical anguish, Roger. I think, it's also the mental pressure as well, right?
Yes.
And so just kind of let yourself relax a little bit and recover physically and mentally, but not lose focus on why you were running. Now, if you're running because you have like this crazed focus on power, I can't help you, because I think that's the wrong reason to run in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's going to hurt a lot more when you don't win, as we saw from the former president. But if you are focused on the right reasons, and for me, I think the only reason is true service to your community, then not winning shouldn't prevent you from continuing that work. You should, in fact, redouble and refocus your efforts on how can you continue to play a positive role in your community. That's kind of how I coped with it. That's how I look at it. And that's why I'm excited about, what the future holds, and hopefully working with more young people and more people in general to win more elections.
Yeah. Do you think that the process of running has changed you? And maybe in what ways has it changed you as a person, as a person in the public space? Wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have the opportunity to interact with a wide array of people, it absolutely changes you. I think you if you're doing it right, you learn to be more empathetic, more sympathetic, more thoughtful of how your words might be perceived and how they may be received by others. And I think that it really puts in perspective just how much struggle is out there. I remember, this is before the pandemic hit and we were knocking doors. There's plenty of mobile home communities in every district, and certainly in First District of Virginia was no exception. And I told my team, like, hey, we should go knock at this mobile home community. And they looked at me like I had, 7 heads. And it was just like, well, nobody ever goes there. I'm like, well, that's exactly why we need to go there. And the response was, well, they never vote. And I said, well, see, that's the chicken or the egg question, right? Do they not vote because nobody goes there, or does nobody go there because they don't vote? Right? Which one is it? And knocking on these doors, there was a pretty good cross section of conservatives and liberals, but across the board, even the diehard conservatives said, you got my vote because you're the first person in 20 years that's ever shown up here and actually said that you gave a damn. And that's really that's really what it comes down to. Just show people that you give a damn about them and you care about them. And so I think, as much as I try to be thoughtful, given the work I do in human rights law, I don't ever want to make the mistake of thinking that I'm like some enlightened guy who just knows all the struggles out there. I've learned so much, and I hope to continue to take that with me in everything I do going forward.
Yeah. One of the things that was surprising to me running, and you and I have talked about the struggles for candidates like us who aren't independently wealthy and fundraising, was how honest people are with you when you ask them for money. If you know them, if you don't know them. And the thing that mentally I had to recalibrate on when I was making fundraising calls was, you ask somebody, hey, can you give me $500 or $1,000 or even, $50 or $100? And people feel the need to tell you exactly why they can't give you that money. And it was a good reminder for me that, we might put on a strong face on the outside, but pretty much everyone that you meet is fighting some sort of secret battle, right? I lost count of the number of times, people that I knew, I thought I knew well would tell me, I can't give to you because, my dad, he's had cancer and we've been trying to keep it quiet, and, we're going into debt trying to, provide for his care, or, I can't give because, I'm overcoming, addiction myself, and, the debt that's associated with that. So empathy is, you thought you knew what it was before you were a candidate, but, afterwards, I think you realize that, you can never have enough of it.
Well, and just the fact that even though you're not elected yet, people confide their struggles in you and their problems with you, and I don't think a day went by that I didn't get an email from somebody saying, I'm having difficulty getting my kid lunch money, or I'm trying to make my gas bill work. We launched the Compassion Through Action initiative, which was designed to address that. And so folks needed face masks or food or water. We did our best, and I'm proud to say that we helped over 1,000 people across the district, and we didn't do it based on whether they were going to vote for me or not. We didn't even mention politics, but we did it because it was the right thing to do. And so, Roger, you nailed it, right? Folks are struggling out there badly, and we need more empathy in this world right now, desperately.
Yeah, agreed. Did it ever occur to you, you're going through, you expect to win on election night, you're disappointed that you don't win. Did it ever occur to you to launch a 60 to 90 day campaign to discredit the result of that election, and to storm a federal building to try to overturn the results of that election? I wonder if you can talk to me about, because I know, and I've been public about, how very strongly I feel. And it doesn't matter that I'm a veteran and I have an opinion and a feeling, or the son of a police officer, or someone who worked in Congress as a staffer in the House. What was your response and reaction to, the insurrection at the Capitol? Because I do think that my initial goal at this podcast was to talk about personal stories about how we deal with disappointment and loss, but in the wake of this very public bad way to take a loss, I feel like it's important to ask folks like you, what was your reaction to that? And what does that portend for us moving forward and trying to unify as a country?
As painful as the loss was on November 3rd for me, November 6th was a factor of 10 times more painful to watch that happening. There is no comparison whatsoever, because not only did that lead to the death of Officer Brian Sicknick, 2 more officers, to my understanding, have died by suicide since then. 4 other people were killed, 139 officers were injured. I don't know how many members of Congress suffered PTSD and trauma, how many got sick from COVID-19 due to the close proximity, the lack of an inauguration that we could enjoy, all those things that resulted due to this big lie. When I called my opponent election night, I said to him that despite everything, if you serve the next 2 years upholding these principles of justice and compassion, then I will support you 100% of the way. You have my word. But I really need you to listen to everyone in the district, not just those who you think agree with you. And he responded, not to me, but to the public, by accepting victory while denouncing the election as fraudulent in the exact same election. The hypocrisy notwithstanding. And then he sent out emails bragging about how he's funding the president's challenges and the president's campaigns. And now we learned that he was taking that money and funneling them into his own businesses. It was a grift of all grifts. And so this big lie that he perpetuated, the president, along with the support of just about every member of the Republican House and Senate, including my opponent, is what directly led to that insurrection. And it's unconscionable. It interrupted our, until then, near perfect streak, at least since the Civil War, of peaceful transitions of power. And it speaks to just how fragile this democracy is. And I think, here's what I think about the most in all this, that despite the record-breaking turnout of this election, still the biggest block of registered voters were people who didn't vote.
Yeah.
And it just speaks to how critical it is. I don't consider Republicans my enemy. I really don't. And that may not be a popular opinion among some liberals and progressives, but I really don't. I consider apathy our enemy. It's apathy that's allowed us to think that our vote doesn't matter or that it's not going to make a difference and keeps us home. And when that happens, people with malicious and violent motives are going to have just enough influence to take over. And we're not going to win by fighting a more violent fight back. We're going to win by voting more, organizing better, and leading by example. And that's where, as painful as that insurrection was and is, it did not succeed in destroying our democracy. But if we don't take swift action and mobilize, the next time it just might. And that's what really scares me.
Yeah, agreed, man. I mean, I'm glad that you're in this fight with us. And one of my goals here is, I come from a conservative family, right? I have close family members who are still, hardcore Republicans, and it's to show people that there are folks out there like you who have run with honor and integrity. They happen to be Democrats. They happen to be progressive. There is no giant conspiracy to steal elections. We're out here scrapping because we believe in principles and values, just like, my Republican family members do. So thank you for being on here. And I just want to close with one last question for you, which is, what do you wish you knew at the beginning of the campaign for you, whether that's your congressional campaign or your state campaign, that you know now? What, would you change anything, or what's something that you wish you knew that maybe would have made your experience maybe not successful electorally, but maybe easier for you to deal with and to manage?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that can be said for time invested in just building relationships. There's really no magic formula, right? Or magic campaign ad or magic tweet that's going to win an election. It really does come down to relationships. And for anyone who's really focused on running, and I'm proud of the relationships that we had built beforehand, but they were a step in the right direction, but I needed to be sprinting in that direction. And that's what I think I would encourage everyone to do. Build those relationships. My campaign manager, Ayodele Okewo, who is now working on Jennifer Carroll Foy's campaign for governor, did something that I didn't want to do, but he made me do it. And I'm glad he did. In the primary, he made me call every single elected official in the first district across all levels. It was like 500 people. And Republicans and Democrats alike, and just have a conversation with them. And that paid massive dividends in the general election. So take the time to invest in those relationships and make sure you build those relationships on a meaningful platform of trust, because that's going to serve you extraordinarily well in the long term.
Yeah. Qasim, where can folks find you on social media if they want to follow your excellent work and what comes next for you?
Super easy to find. Just my name, at Qasim Rashid, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, kind of across the board. And what comes next for me is just continuing my work to support immigrants, DV survivors, small businesses, nonprofits. I've got a Patreon account as well. And in 2021, what I'm heavily focused on is here in Virginia, making sure that we keep the House of Delegates blue. And so you'll probably find me running around with a bunch of different campaigns in Virginia to make sure we can win those seats again.
Awesome. Qasim, I love you. Thanks for being my first guest on How to Lose an Election. And thank you for being an example to all of us. I look forward to talking with you again.
Love you too, brother. Thank you for having me, man. God bless.
God bless. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode with my first guest, Qasim Rashid. As always, please head to our show's Patreon page and support to sustain the great content that we put out here. Next week, my guest will be Tedra Cobb, who ran for Congress in the North Country of upstate New York. It's going to be a great episode, so please support the show, help us continue to put great content out, and we'll see you next week.